I'll never forget the day our team decided to tackle the infamous Pendle Hill. The locals had warned us about the eerie atmosphere and unexplained occurrences that plagued the mist-shrouded peaks. But we were a group of seasoned investigators, equipped with nothing but our wits and an insatiable curiosity for the unknown. We arrived at the base of the hill on a chilly autumn evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon. The sky was a deep shade of indigo, with clouds that seemed to swirl and twist like living things. As we began our ascent, the air grew thick with an unsettling mist that clung to our skin like a damp shroud. Our team consisted of 5 members: myself, Dr. Emma Taylor, a renowned parapsychologist; Jack Harris, a skilled audio engineer; Sarah Lee, a photographer with a keen eye for detail; Tom Bradley, an experienced outdoorsman; and Rachel Kim, a talented EVP recorder. We had all been drawn to Pendle Hill by whispers of a mysterious recording that had been circulating online, a chilling EVP captured on the windswept moors. According to legend, this EVP was unlike any other, speaking in hushed tones of an ancient power that slumbered deep beneath the earth. As we climbed higher, the mist grew denser until it seemed as though we were walking through a veil of secrecy. We had chosen Pendle Hill for its unique energy signature, believed by some to be connected to the old craft, an ancient pagan tradition rumored to have been practiced in these very hills centuries ago. Our mission was to uncover the truth behind the mysterious EVP and unravel the tangled threads of Pendle Hill's dark history. As we reached the summit of Pendle Hill, a sense of unease settled over our group. The wind howled through the trees like a chorus of restless spirits, and the mist swirled around us like a living entity. We began to set up our equipment, carefully deploying cameras, microphones, and EMF sensors across the hillside. Jack Harris took charge of the audio setup, while Sarah Lee started snapping photos of the surrounding landscape. I led Tom Bradley on a tour of the local history, pointing out ancient burial grounds and ritual sites that had been hidden beneath the heather for centuries. Rachel Kim, meanwhile, was busy calibrating her EVP recorder, adjusting dials and knobs with a practiced hand. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unblinking eyes were trained on us from the depths of the mist. The air was heavy with an almost palpable sense of anticipation, as though the hill itself was waiting for us to uncover its secrets. Our initial sweep of the area yielded nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual signs of wind and weather wear, but I couldn't help feeling that we were missing something. It wasn't until Rachel called out from her position near the summit that our attention turned to the task at hand. "Guys, I've got something here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm picking up some strange activity on my recorder." We converged on Rachel's location, where she was holding up the EVP recorder for all to see. The display screen flickered and pulsed with an otherworldly energy, as though the device itself was alive and humming with electricity. And then, without warning, the recording began to play. The recording began as a low hum, almost imperceptible but growing louder with each passing moment. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, a cacophony of whispers and sighs that seemed to emanate from all directions at once. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakable, a mournful, longing quality that sent shivers down my spine. Jack's eyes were fixed on the recorder, his face set in a determined expression as he worked to capture every detail of the EVP. Sarah Lee stood frozen beside him, her camera at the ready, while Tom Bradley paced back and forth, muttering something under his breath about ancient energies and resonance. Rachel Kim's eyes were closed, her fingers pressed against the earpiece of her recorder as she focused on capturing every nuance of the sound. I stood at the edge of the group, feeling a creeping sense of unease that seemed to seep into my bones with each passing moment. The wind howled and moaned around us, but it was nothing compared to the raw emotional power of the EVP. As we listened, transfixed, the recording began to take on a life of its own. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they seemed to be speaking directly into our ears. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized that we were not alone on Pendle Hill. Whatever was making this sound, it was watching us, waiting for us to uncover the secrets that lay hidden beneath its surface. As we continued to listen to the EVP, I began to notice something strange. The whispers seemed to be shifting, rearranging themselves into a pattern that was both familiar and yet completely alien. It was as if the sound was trying to convey a message, but in a language that none of us could understand. Sarah Lee's eyes were fixed on her camera, which had captured the EVP on film, but she looked uneasy, as though she sensed something was off. Tom Bradley stopped packing and stood still, his eyes closed as if he was trying to tune into some hidden frequency. Jack Harris fiddled with the audio settings, trying to enhance the sound, while Rachel Kim sat cross-legged on the ground, her eyes closed in concentration. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that we were not alone on Pendle Hill. The wind had died down, and an unsettling stillness had fallen over the landscape. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been altered and we were caught in the midst of it. Suddenly, Sarah Lee spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I've got something on camera." She held up the film, showing us a grainy image that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The figure in the background was indistinct, but its presence seemed to fill the frame, casting a dark shadow over everything else. We stared at the image in stunned silence, our minds struggling to comprehend what we were seeing. And then, without warning, the wind began to pick up again, howling through the trees like a chorus of restless spirits. As we gazed at the image on Sarah's camera, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It was as if we had stumbled into something much larger than ourselves, something that had been hidden for centuries. Tom Bradley, ever the scholar, spoke up, his voice filled with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "Guys, I think I know what this is." He paused, collecting his thoughts before continuing. "This hill has a dark history, one that's steeped in local folklore." Rachel Kim leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with interest. "What do you mean?" Tom hesitated, as if unsure whether to proceed. "Well, there are stories about an ancient cult that used to worship on this very hill. They believed in a powerful entity, one that could grant them immense power and knowledge." Jack Harris raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like some old wives' tale to me," he said skeptically, but Tom shook his head. No, it's more than that. The stories talk about a figure known as the Black Lady, a woman who was said to appear on the hill, beckoning people to come closer." Sarah Lee shuddered, her eyes fixed on the image on the camera screen. "That sounds like something out of a horror movie," she whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we were dealing with more than just a simple EVP. We were touching on something much deeper, something that had been hidden for centuries. As we delved deeper into the local folklore, our team began to uncover a dark history that had been hidden for centuries. The stories of the Black Lady seemed to be woven into the fabric of the hill itself, and it was as if we were being drawn into a world of ancient rituals and forbidden knowledge. We spoke with local historians and researchers who shared their findings, piecing together a narrative of a long-forgotten cult that had once thrived on Pendle Hill. The cult, known as the Order of the Black Lady, was said to have been dedicated to an ancient deity, one that demanded human sacrifice in exchange for power and knowledge. Tom Bradley's eyes grew wide with excitement as he spoke about the rituals, his words dripping with a sense of reverence and fear. They believed that by appeasing this entity, they could unlock the secrets of the universe, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But at what cost? Rachel Kim shuddered, her eyes fixed on the image on the camera screen. I don't want to think about it, she whispered. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, as if we were playing with forces beyond our control. Jack Harris spoke up, his voice laced with skepticism. This all sounds like just a bunch of old wives' tales to me, he said. But Sarah Lee shook her head, her eyes locked on the image. I don't think it's just stories, Jack. I think this is real. And as we stood there, frozen in time, the wind picked up once more, carrying with it a faint whisper that seemed to echo through the ages. The Black Lady awaits. As we continued to discuss the dark history of Pendle Hill, a sense of excitement and trepidation began to build within our team. We knew that we had to explore the hill further, to see if we could uncover any physical evidence of the cult's activities. Tom Bradley led the way, his eyes scanning the terrain as he navigated through the heather-covered moor. Rachel Kim followed closely behind, her camera and equipment at the ready. Jack Harris brought up the rear, his skeptical expression a stark contrast to the sense of wonder that seemed to be growing within us all. I trailed behind, my senses on high alert as we made our way deeper into the heart of the hill. The wind howled and moaned around us, but it was nothing compared to the feeling of unease that seemed to be building in my stomach. As we climbed higher, the air grew thick with an eerie, unnatural silence. It was as if the hill itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, Rachel Kim stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes fixed on something in the distance. What is it? Tom Bradley called out, his voice carrying across the moor. Rachel turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over the landscape before coming to rest on a small clearing up ahead. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone monument, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings. The Black Lady's symbol, I realized with a jolt of fear. What does it mean? Jack Harris asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom Bradley shook his head. I don't know, but I think we're about to find out. As we approached the monument, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and the wind carried a faint whispering sound that sent shivers down my spine. Rachel Kim knelt beside the monument, her eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. Suddenly, she let out a gasp and pointed to a series of footprints leading off into the distance. Look at this, she exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. Tom Bradley knelt beside her, his eyes fixed on the prints. They were small, almost child-sized, but they seemed to be moving of their own accord. Jack Harris raised an eyebrow. What's going on here? He asked, his tone skeptical, but Rachel just shook her head. I don't know, but I think we should follow them. I hesitated, feeling a sense of unease wash over me. But before I could speak, Tom Bradley stood up and began to follow the footprints. The others followed close behind, our hearts pounding in unison as we made our way deeper into the heart of the hill. As we walked, the whispering sound grew louder until it seemed to be coming from all around us. Suddenly, Sarah Lee pulled out her audio recorder and pressed play. The sound that emerged was like nothing I had ever heard before, a soft, melancholy whispering that seemed to be calling out to us. What is this? Jack Harris asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom Bradley shook his head. I don't know, but I think it's coming from there. He nodded towards a small opening in the rock face ahead of us. The others followed him through the narrow passage, our hearts pounding in unison as we made our way deeper into the heart of the hill. As we made our way through the narrow passage, the whispering sound grew louder and more distinct. It was a soft, mournful voice that seemed to be calling out to us, drawing us deeper into the heart of the hill. The air grew colder and damper, and I could feel a fine mist on my skin as we walked. Suddenly, the passage opened up into a large cavern, the ceiling lost in darkness. The whispering sound was like nothing I had ever heard before. It was as if the very rocks themselves were speaking to us. Rachel Kim stood frozen at the edge of the pool, her eyes fixed on something in the center of the room. "What is it?" Tom Bradley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel turned slowly, her gaze sweeping over the landscape before coming to rest on a small, ornate box. It was made of a dark, polished wood and adorned with strange symbols and markings. The Black Lady's symbol, I realized with a jolt of fear. "What does it mean?" Jack Harris asked, his voice full of awe. Tom Bradley shook his head. "I don't know, but I think we should open it." Rachel hesitated, her hand hovering over the lid. But then, with a sense of trepidation, she reached out and opened it. A faint light spilled out, illuminating the room and casting eerie shadows on the walls. As the light grew brighter, I saw that inside the box was a small, leather-bound book. It was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age. Tom Bradley picked it up, his eyes scanning the pages before coming to rest on a single sentence. "This is it," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "This is the key to the mystery." As we stood there, frozen in time, the whispering sound grew louder and more insistent. It was as if the rocks themselves were urging us to read the book, to uncover the secrets that lay within. And so, with a sense of trepidation, we began to read. As we delved deeper into the book, the whispering sound grew louder and more intense. It was as if the rocks themselves were urging us to uncover the secrets that lay within. But then, without warning, the air around us seemed to shift and change. The temperature dropped, and the mist that had been swirling around us began to take on a life of its own. I could feel a presence in the room with us, a presence that was watching us, studying us. Rachel Kim let out a gasp and stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. "What is it?" Tom Bradley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But before he could answer, Sarah Lee spoke up. "I think we should get out of here," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "Now." I couldn't argue with her. The air was thick with an unexplained presence, and I could feel its malevolent energy washing over us like a cold wave. We turned to make our way back through the passage, but as we did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the wall, in letters that seemed to be carved out of the very rock itself, was a single word: "Welcome." The presence seemed to be coalescing into a figure, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. We knew then that we had to get out of there, and fast. We turned and ran, our hearts pounding in unison as we made our way back through the passage. But as we emerged into the bright sunlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the presence was still with us, waiting for its next move. As we emerged from the passage, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had left something behind, something that would haunt us forever. We knew then that we had to confront the truth about what had happened on this hill, and what lay within the ancient ritual that had taken place there. But as we began to question each other, to piece together the events of that fateful night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over me. It was as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling, revealing secrets that were meant to remain hidden. Tom Bradley's eyes locked onto mine, his gaze burning with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "We have to know the truth," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "We can't just leave it all behind." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized what he was saying. He wanted to go back, to uncover the secrets of the ritual and understand the true nature of the presence that had been watching us. But at what cost? I knew then that we were playing with fire, tampering with forces beyond our control. And yet, despite my reservations, I felt a sense of morbid curiosity drawing me in. What if the truth was out there, waiting for us to uncover it? What if the secrets of the hill held the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe? I looked at Rachel and Sarah, their faces set with determination. We were all in this together now, bound by a shared sense of wonder and horror. Together, we took our first step back into the unknown, leaving behind the safety of the sunlight and embracing the darkness that lay within. As we delved deeper into the mystery of the hill, I began to feel a sense of unease growing inside me. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that some secrets were meant to remain hidden. But Tom was relentless, driven by a hunger for knowledge that bordered on obsession. He pushed us further and further into the unknown, until we stumbled upon an ancient text that spoke of a dark ritual performed on this very hill. According to legend, the ritual had awakened a malevolent force that now stalked the land, seeking out its next victim. I tried to warn Tom to caution him against proceeding, but he wouldn't listen. He was convinced that by uncovering the truth, we could harness its power and bend it to our will. But as we pressed on, I began to feel my grip on reality slipping away. The lines between reality and madness blurred, and I found myself questioning what was real and what was just a product of my own fevered imagination. Rachel and Sarah were no better off than I. They too had succumbed to the madness that seemed to be creeping over us all. We began to experience strange visions and auditory hallucinations, as if the very fabric of our minds was unraveling before our eyes. And then, one by one, we started to vanish. At first, it was just small things: a missing book, a forgotten conversation, a misplaced item. But as time went on, the disappearances grew more frequent and more disturbing. We would find ourselves standing in front of doors that we knew we had never opened before, or walking through rooms that seemed to be shifting and changing around us like a living, breathing entity. It was as if we were being pulled apart at the seams, our minds splintering into 1,000 different fragments. And then, one by one, we reappeared, but not quite ourselves. Our eyes had changed, our smiles twisted and cruel. We knew that we had crossed a threshold, that we could never go back to who we once were. We were no longer human, but mere puppets of the darkness that lurked within us all.